A silent killer stalked the streets of medieval Europe, but it was not the one they feared. This is the story of a devastating historical panic that led to the mass extermination of cats across a continent. By the end, you will understand how a single decree unleashed a chain reaction of death and disease that reshaped history. We will uncover why an entire society turned against its most effective protectors and trace the chilling path from superstition to pandemic. What does it take for fear to blind us to the truth right in front of our eyes? To understand why cats became the target, we must first see them through medieval eyes. Their presence was woven into the fabric of daily life, a constant and necessary companion. In a world of timber, thatch, and precious stored grain, rodents were more than a nuisance, they were a direct threat to survival. A single family of mice could decimate a winter's food supply. Rats carried disease in their fur and fleas, so the cat, the silent, efficient hunter, was an unsung guardian. You would find them in peasant cottages, in the vast granaries of lords, and prowling the decks of merchant ships, their job always the same: keep the vermin at bay. This made them valuable, but it never made them truly beloved. Their symbolism was far more shadowed and complex. In the old pagan traditions that still whispered through the countryside, cats were often linked to fertility and the home, creatures of independence and mystery. But as the church sought to solidify its authority, these earlier associations began to darken. The cat's nocturnal habits, its glowing eyes, its uncanny silence, all became evidence of something sinister. Folklore began to paint them as the familiars of witches, demonic spirits in animal form that carried out curses and drank their mistress's blood. A black cat crossing your path was not just bad luck, it was an omen of malevolent magic. Yet even here there was contradiction. Inside the very monasteries that preached against pagan spirits, monks often kept cats as companions. You can see them in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, curled peacefully at a scribe's feet, a quiet testament to a more gentle relationship. This was the ambivalence. The cat existed in a precarious space between utility and suspicion, between a working animal and a supernatural symbol. They were tolerated for their service, but they were never trusted. Their position in society was entirely conditional. So when a true, incomprehensible terror began to spread, when people felt an overwhelming need to find a cause, to identify an agent of evil they could see and fight, the cat was already halfway to being condemned. The stage was set not by outright hatred, but by a deep, lingering fear that simply needed a spark to explode into flames. That spark came in the year 1233, and it arrived with the full authority of God on earth. Pope Gregory IX, a formidable and uncompromising leader, was engaged in a fierce campaign against heresy. His inquisitors in the Rhineland, a region of modern Germany, were investigating a shadowy sect they called the Luciferians. To understand the power of what happened next, you must picture the medieval world where a letter from the Pope was not just an opinion. It was a decree carried by messengers on horseback, read aloud in cathedrals, and treated as divine truth by millions. The document Pope Gregory issued was titled Vox in Roma, the voice in Roma. It was a detailed, horrifying account of the heretic's initiation ritual, a description so vivid it bypassed reason and planted a nightmare directly into the public mind. According to the bull, a new member would be led into a secret gathering where a black cat of unusual size would appear. This cat, the document stated, was the devil himself. The initiate would kiss the cat on its rear end, then on its mouth, and finally renounce the Christian faith entirely. The report went on to describe a scene of depraved feasting and promiscuous revelry, all lit by the eerie glow of a single candle that would then be extinguished, plunging the ceremony into sinful darkness. Now, historians widely believe this entire description was a fabrication, a piece of propaganda crafted by inquisitors. There is no evidence such a sect or ritual ever existed. But that did not matter. What mattered was the source. This was not a peasant's ghost story whispered by a fireplace. This was an official proclamation from the throne of St. Peter, stamped with the authority of the papacy. In a single stroke, Pope Gregory IX had done the unthinkable. He had canonized the superstition. He took the vague folk fear of cats as witch familiars and elevated it to a matter of documented theological fact. The black cat was no longer just a suspicious animal. It was now officially an avatar of Satan, a living symbol of heresy. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Vox in Roma did not merely suggest cats were bad, it declared open season on them. If the devil could take the form of a black cat, then every black cat could be the devil. Killing one was not cruelty, it was an act of piety, a blow struck for Christendom. The papal bull acted like a permission slip for mass hysteria, transforming local suspicion into a continent-wide dogma. The hunt was on, and it would begin with the most visible targets, the very creatures that had lived in the shadows of every home and barn. The papal decree unleashed a wave of violence that is almost incomprehensible in its scale and cruelty. What began as scattered acts of superstition became organized, communal slaughter. Across towns and villages, cats were rounded up and killed in horrifying public spectacles. They were thrown into sacks and drowned in rivers, tossed alive into bonfires on feast days, beaten to death in the streets with clubs, or hurled from the tops of church towers. In the French city of Metz, records describe an annual festival where dozens of cats were burned in a wicker basket as the townspeople danced and sang around the flames, believing they were destroying demons in physical form. This was not hidden brutality, it was celebrated. The killing of cats transformed into a perverse form of public piety, a way for entire communities to prove their collective devotion by destroying the papal decreed symbol of Satan. Neighbors would watch each other, eager to demonstrate their own zeal and suspicious of anyone who showed mercy to the creatures. To protect a cat was to risk being accused of heresy yourself, of being in league with the very evil you were supposed to be fighting. The social pressure was immense, turning fear into a weapon that severed the ancient, practical bond between humans and these animals. Town records from places like Ypres in Belgium meticulously document the expenses for these events, listing payments for the wood to build the pyres and the wine for the town officials who presided over the executions. They were not recording a crime, but a civic duty. The tragic, devastating irony is that in their fervor to purge imagined evil, these communities were systematically dismantling their most effective defense against a very real one. Every cat drowned or burned was a skilled hunter removed from the ecosystem. Each public festival that ended with the screams of dying cats was unknowingly an invitation to a far quieter, more prolific killer. The rats, now freed from their primary predator, began to multiply in the shadows of granaries, homes, and ships with terrifying speed. People were congratulating themselves for fighting the devil, all while clearing the path for his most deadly plague. The rats did not need an invitation, but they received one all the same. With their primary predators systematically eradicated, rodent populations exploded. This was not a minor nuisance. The black rat, a sleek and agile climber, thrived in the very heart of medieval life. It nested in the thatched roofs of cottages, burrowed into the wattle and daub walls, and feasted freely in granaries and storehouses. Every cat killed meant dozens, then hundreds of rats could live, breed, and multiply unchecked. But the rat itself was not the ultimate killer, it was merely the vehicle. Living in its fur were fleas, and in the gut of those fleas thrived a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. When an infected flea bit a rat, the rat would sicken and die. The flea, now desperate for a new host, would jump to the nearest warm body, which was often a human. With that simple bite, the plague entered the bloodstream. The timeline here is chilling. The papal bull Vox in Roma was issued in 1233. The subsequent century saw the widespread, enthusiastic purge of cats across Europe. Then, in 1347, the Black Death arrived in Sicily, beginning its relentless march across the continent. This was no coincidence. For over 100 years, Europe had been methodically disarming its first line of defense against the very creature that carried the plague. The cat killings did not cause the Black Death, the bacterium did. But the massacre of cats almost certainly turned a horrific pandemic into a civilization-altering catastrophe. By allowing rat populations to reach unprecedented densities in cities and villages, medieval society had created the perfect conditions for the disease to burn like wildfire through human populations. The ecological impact was immediate and severe. Even before the plague struck, the consequences were felt in the stomach. Rats and mice devoured stored grain, contaminated food with their droppings, and gnawed through sacks, ropes, and valuable trade goods. A bad harvest could mean famine, but a thriving rat population could guarantee it, turning a community's hard-won surplus into dust and waste. The economic damage was immense, as stores of wool, cloth, and leather on merchant ships and in warehouses were ruined. In trying to destroy an imaginary demon, they had empowered a very real scourge. The public health disaster that followed was born from this perfect storm of superstition and ecological ignorance. The streets they had cleared of cats now teemed with rodents, and in their fur rode the end of the world. The plague that followed was a biological event, but the scale of its devastation was a man-made tragedy. This chain of events forms one of history's most heartbreaking examples of unintended consequences. It began with a piece of misinformation, an official lie from the highest authority that painted the cat as a demon. That lie ignited a mass hysteria, turning practical working animals into scapegoats for society's deepest fears. The organized slaughter that followed was an act of communal panic, a desperate attempt to burn away perceived evil. But nature does not operate on superstition. By destroying their cats, medieval Europe dismantled a critical ecological balance. The resulting explosion of rats created the perfect conditions for the plague bacterium to leap from rodents to humans with terrifying efficiency. The hunt for a mythical evil had directly paved the way for a very real catastrophe that would wipe out millions. This story is about more than medieval ignorance. It is a timeless lesson about the dangers of scapegoating and the profound cost of severing our connection to the natural world. When fear is sanctioned by authority, it can blind entire civilizations to the obvious truth right in front of them. People sought a simple, visible enemy to destroy, and in doing so, they eliminated their own protectors. It asks us a difficult question: what are the modern cats in our own society? What useful, perhaps misunderstood, guardians do we blame for our complex problems, only to risk creating a far greater disaster by removing them? The echo of that medieval panic reminds us that the easiest target is rarely the true cause, and that the most dangerous monsters are sometimes the ones we invent ourselves.